Today we're going to talk about Pete's top 10 pet electric wiring peeves. Hi, I'm Pete at Project Heaven and welcome to the final video in our week-long series of looking at electrics. In today's video we're going to talk about Pete's top 10 electric peeves, starting at number 10. Incorrect fuse ratings and corroded fuses. Often when we come to a car that's been worked on previously by another person, we'll find that they've put the wrong rating of fuses in, normally too high because they've got a wiring fault elsewhere which has caused the fuses to blow. So they just go, oh, I'll put a 30 amp in. That's not the way it should be. You've got to find the original fault and then put the correct rating in for that. The other biggest problem we have with fuse boxes is, like I said, corrosion. Glass fuses, in particular, tend to corrode on the outside and make bad contact. Also, the fuse box itself can corrode, so sometimes you have to take all the fuses out. We normally take the fuse box out and vapor blast it to bring it right back to clean, and then put a brand new set of fuses in. And one final thing with fuses, the glass fuses, sometimes the cheap ones will fall apart, and actually inside the glass itself, the filament falls out, and it looks okay, but it's actually not making contact. Coming in at number 9, incorrect wire colouring. So most of the time on like Lucas stuff, you would be expecting to see a blue and a white wire and a blue and a red wire. By that I mean blue, majority of the wire blue with a trace of red or a trace of white on it. That would be your headlights. You'd have green with a trace for your indicators. You'd have red on its own as side lights, for example. But sometimes if someone's rewired a car, it'll be complete nonsense and doesn't conform to that at all. Obviously, there's loads of different wiring conventions. You know, basically it needs to be as per original. That's what you're aiming for. At number 8, it is positive earth cars. I don't have a problem with positive earth cars. What I have a problem with is when people wire things onto positive earth cars the wrong way round, which happens more often than you would think. A lot of the time we'll see something like an ignition coil where the positive and negative are actually wired the wrong way because the person that's installed it is used to installing it on a negative earth car, and that's not good for the coil. Number 7, using insulation tape when you should be using heat shrink. When you solder a wire together or you've got a bare connection you need to cover, you should be using heat shrink, not sticky back insulation tape, because over time the adhesive can fall off the tape, the tape gets old, and it'll unravel and you'll have a bare connection. And also, I see a lot of people using insulation tape for covering looms, and then when you come to unravel the loom, you get covered in this horrible sticky stuff. You should be using a proper loom tape for that, and you'll see that in one of our previous videos. Number 6, this is a real dangerous one, and you see it all too often. No grommets being used when wires are going through panels. Obviously, if you've just drilled a rough hole in a panel and just shoved a cable straight through it that's carrying power, there's a good chance it'll end up chafing through eventually in a car that vibrates all day long. So yeah, always use grommets. Number 5, untidy wiring, and in particular, tight wiring, where basically we've got no strain relief. So you maybe have a bunch of cables and one of them is particularly tight, then that one cable ends up taking the strain of all of the weight of the rest of the cables and eventually snaps or pulls out of its connector. That's a real problem. Number 4, dry solder joints. You'll see this in one of our previous videos where I show how to do this properly. Not making dry solder joints, by actually soldering it properly. When you have a dry solder joint, you may have a joint that looks okay, but actually the solder hasn't flowed and it's not carrying the electricity properly, so you'll get an intermittent problem, or it'll just fall apart. So yeah, making sure your solder joints are nice and wet. Number 3, so we're really getting to the ones that really annoy me now. This is when people use the incorrect tool for crimping. As you can see, there's a lot of tools you might need, and there's more than this in my toolbox. You always need to make sure you're buying and using the correct tool for the crimp. I see it way too often where someone will pick up a pair of needle nose pliers and crush a crimp in that's meant to be done with something more like this. And of course, when it's not crimped in properly, it'll fail at some point. It's just going to happen. So absolutely use the right tool for the job. Number 2, bodge connections. And by that I mean wires just twisted together, no solder on them. I'm talking about chalk blocks and Scotch locks, all those sorts of things. I hate them, and they're not even, I can't even show you what one of those looks like because I don't keep any in my workshop. They're terrible, so don't use them. And number one, this is my absolute biggest hate. So, okay, so say you've disregarded all of my other information and you're not using the right tools, you're not soldering a joint properly. Okay, fine, you've done that, but at least pull the connection and see if you can rip it out. And that's it, a tug test. If you can't rip it out and you've done a bodge connection, well, at least it's going to stay in. But the worst when someone doesn't even bother checking their crap connection. Okay, so those are my top 10 pet wiring peeves. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's worth of videos, and I hope that it's been of some use to you guys. Check us out in our next videos.